Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Daily Defender. Glad you guys are with us. Glad we're back with you. Glad we're getting you out another video here, hopefully in a little more timely manner. Our usual admin and notations, really thank you, everyone, for the new subscribers. Really appreciate you guys. Welcome back to all of our current subscribers. A warm welcome back. Please continue to like the channel and subscribe and mention it in your networks and all that kind of thing. As usual, great comments. As you guys know, I love the interaction with you all, and the comments are great. So really appreciate that. Today, really what I want to bring to you is a very interesting firearm. It's a Sig Sauer p229 in 40 cal DAK, and the DAK stands for double action Kellerman, and it refers specifically to the trigger. And that's really kind of what sets this particular 229 apart. And there's a lot of things we need to unpack again, and we'll do that in the deep dive. We'll get a little bit of chronological history. We'll obviously go through the pistol head to toe. I'll talk about what I like about it. We're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about the trigger, and I'm also going to compare it to a couple other firearms as well that I think are at least kind of in the same zone with this one. But maybe we'll just go a little bit longer here in the intro and just talk about a few of the things. Again, the 800-pound gorilla with this particular model is the DAK trigger, and it gets a very interesting rap kind of out in the social media. There's probably as many people who dislike it as many people who do like it. And I think part of that is maybe they just don't completely understand the trigger mechanism. I actually fell into that camp myself. I shot this gun a couple years ago and actually did struggle a little bit with the trigger. But I think part of that was an expectation of the trigger to be something that it wasn't. And again, we'll get into that on the deep dive. But that's really the 800-pound gorilla in the room with this gun. Maybe the 600-pound gorilla is the fact that the U.S. Secret Service used this gun for almost 20 years. And so then you have to start asking yourself, if the U.S. Secret Service thinks the DAK trigger is solid, why does it get such a bad rap? And maybe the gorilla that you didn't know was in the room was the fact that the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, put in a very large contract for this particular pistol. And again, I'll get a little bit more into the deep dive on that and some of the numbers. But this gorilla that you didn't know in the room is that this firearm was issued and used by the Coast Guard MSRT teams and some of their other teams in their maritime law enforcement duties. And so they use this particular firearm to success as well. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that on the deep dive. So it's a little bit more in the intro there, but let's go ahead and do that. Let's get to the deep dive on this Sig p229 DAK. So as I just introduced, we've got our Sig p229 DAK, and this is a really, really interesting and fun firearm to talk about. It has got some kind of neat little history to it, which I definitely want to get into. And of course, it's a clear and safe firearm, so we can do that now. So we've got a clear and safe firearm to work with. You generally, on the channel, I always like to give you guys some reference points and some chronological things and some history, so we're going to spend a few minutes on that. This 229 is very interesting as a firearm. It is, again, another child, believe it or not, of the 1986 Miami FBI shootout, and you've heard me talk about that on the channel a lot. It's a very pivotal point for a number of reasons, a lot of reasons, but it has a direct impact, a hard right turn, if you will, on firearms and ammunition development. And as we all probably know, the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge kind of comes out the winner eventually in that FBI protocol. And so a lot of firearms manufacturers were building firearms for that around that time. SIG is no different. The 229 that we have here was specifically designed around the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge, and they actually introduced it in the early 90s. I think it was 92 or 93. So it's they take their time, they understand the wear and tear that's going to be on the pistol, the increased pressures with the 40 Smith & Wesson and all of that, and take their time and then introduce the 229 in the early 90s. In the mid-90s, they introduced their 357 SIG cartridge, and so this is a shared platform, kind of brother-sister here. And it gets a little bit more interesting from there because there's some really interesting agencies that then take up this firearm. In the late 90s, right around 2000, the U.S. Secret Service chooses the 229 and 357 SIG and use it for close to 2 decades. And there's enough information back and forth, really stories on both sides, although the stories tend to be heavier, that they did use the DAK trigger. Although the DAK trigger, this double action Kellerman, doesn't come out until 2004. So if they pick up the pistol in late 90s, 2000, most likely it was a double action, single action, and then it appears that at some point they moved to the DAK. But of course, if anybody could confirm or explain their experience with that, with the Treasury Department, that would be amazing. The U.S. Air Marshals also used it in 357 SIG, and so kind of as I also alluded to in the intro, you know, the 800-pound gorilla in the room is the DAK trigger, which we'll get to. But one of the maybe the gorillas you didn't know in the room was that the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, in 2004 issues a massive contract for these. And, you know, ironically, or it's not ironic that, you know, in 2004 SIG introduces the 229 DAK in probably in conjunction with that contract. I've read anywhere as high as 65,000 pistols over a period of years that SIG was responsible for that contract. I don't know if there were more, I don't know if there were less, I don't know if the contract was completed its entirety. What's even a little bit more interesting, though, is the Coast Guard is part of DHS, and their MSRT teams, both East and West Coast teams, picked up this pistol right here, just like this one, a 40 Smith & Wesson and DAK, and I've read anywhere from between 4,000 and 12,000 pistols for the Coast Guard. I don't know if that was part of the 65 or another additional contract that SIG got, but just very, very interesting on this firearm and the agencies that were picking it up and using it and when SIG introduced it. The other point I wanted to make on that was the DHS contract was very demanding, and I don't think, you know, that's, I've talked about before the HK and the torture test with the USP, and I think these were both kind of happening at the same time. I seem to recall HK bidding for certain government contracts, and it may have been a DHS ICE contract. SIG was doing the same, and so I just, you always kind of hear that torture test assigned to the USP. I don't always hear it assigned to the 229, but it was very similar. I mean, what I read was the barrel plug or squib test, which I had never heard before for the 229, the sand and dirt tests, the saltwater immersion tests, the temperature tests, both extreme high and low, the drop tests and all of that. And then, of course, you know, just the number of rounds. I think I read somewhere close to 3 million rounds over hundreds of pistols, and there had to be X amount of rounds fired with 0 malfunctions and 0 stoppages, which it all passed. So again, just kind of this mouthful of information about what this pistol had to survive to meet that DHS contract. And again, you know, you hear people talk about it, and I have them, and you shoot them, and you see them, and they are extremely well built, robust firearms. I mean, just looking at it, it looks like a combat sidearm. So very interesting. So that's our chronological. That's the contract. You guys like the specs, so let's do that next. It's a 32-ounce pistol with the light, which is another 4 ounces. You're at about 36 total here with this particular firearm. Length is 7 inches in length, 1.5 in width at its widest part, 5.4 in height. Barrel is 3.9 inches, stainless steel. This one's a 40 Smith & Wesson barrel. And magazines are metal magazines, as you might expect. This particular firearm, let me just make mention of that real quick. This one, as far as I can tell, serial number wise, puts it somewhere between 2006 and 2007. I was told it was an LEO trade-in, and we can kind of get to that as well. I do believe that to be the case. It had an old blue case with the manual and 3 magazines. I do believe, again, the walk around will help a little bit, I think, but I do believe that either an armorer got a hold of this, or actually it went back to SIG. Maybe the department turned them back in, and SIG did do some things to kind of clean this up and then get it for sale. But back to the magazines, they were all metal magazines in this gray anodized finish. They were standard 12. My understanding is there were 10 round available, and there's also Metgar 14. Sometimes if you're very observant and looking at certain firearms and certain pictures and holsters, I've seen the Secret Service CAT teams with the extended mags on their Sig 229s. The floor plates were all really nice on these. Nothing was really beat up. What was interesting, and I really don't recall this on other Sigs, I'll have to really look now, but I don't recall plates being stamped in caliber, which was very nice. And I have to assume this was probably part of that government contract. But really nice magazines. We got 3 of those. So I think that's our specs. Those are the usual, I think, things you guys want to know spec-wise. Let's do our usual walk around. We've got a stainless steel slide with a nitron finish, well-known finish, right, for Sig. In fact, it's even stamped stainless, and on this side it's stamped Sig Sauer 229 stainless with the New Hampshire markings. Very nice machining, solid roll pin, serrations on both sides of the firearm. Very nice, grippy, very kind of raised, very nice, work well. Sig night sights were standard. These actually still glow, believe it or not. There's a little bit of glow left in them, even though this is probably a 15-year-old firearm, which was kind of impressive. You've got nice machining here, beveled front and back, no sharp edges or anything like that. Really nice work done there. Coming down to the frame, again, aluminum frame in the black, hard, anodized finish. It's a really nice finish on the frame. Really like it a lot. We've got our takedown lever, slide release, slide stop. There is no decocker because of the DAK. You've got a nice raised mag release, fairly good size trigger guard, rail, of course, because we've got a light attached to it. And then it's a 2-piece grip. They're these polymer type grips. The texture is okay. They are all the 229s of this era, really, in my opinion, before they came out with the E2 grip in 2011. I always thought these were just a little bit chunky and all of that, but it works. What I've decided to do is put this kind of athletic tape on here, this black self-adhesive stuff. I like it a lot. It's cheap. It's easy on and off, all that kind of stuff. And actually, the more you use it, the self-adhesive material starts to actually kind of work its way through or seep through, and you even get a stickier kind of feel to it. So it's a nice, simple way to add something if you don't want to get a Talon grip on there or something like that. So nice in that regard. Beveled magwell, very open, right? Easy for reloads. And the magazines work extremely well with the firearm. There's no question about that. Metal Sig mags always seem to work well in these P-Series guns. So I think that's the kind of the walk around on the firearm. I think what we want to do now is get into the DAK trigger. Okay, DAK, double action Kellemer trigger. Kellemer for the gentleman who designed it. Very interesting, and it's the 800-pound gorilla in the room. Interesting enough, DAK is not noted anywhere on this firearm. It's not stamped in any way, which is, I guess, kind of interesting in my opinion. And my understanding of this trigger, and I have to say, there are as many people who seem to like it as hate it, and I think that stems a little bit from maybe not understanding it or expecting it to be something that it isn't. All of that. I think you have to kind of just take it for what it is, and understanding that and trying to work it and as best you can, or so to learn it as best you can, and then it kind of comes to you. And let me try to explain or show how this works. So, and of course, this is a clear and safe firearm. And so you would generally do just that. You would obviously load the pistol, rack around. You have this kind of recessed hammer here, and you'll see, and I'll try to do the best I can on this angle. As you're pulling the trigger, you can see it's already kind of preloaded, right? We're not drawing the hammer all the way out of the slide. We're kind of preloaded, and so you can watch that travel in time, and then we get to a break. I'll say it is heavy, extremely smooth, and not overly long. And then as we just saw, it broke, and of course, the firearm would, cycle. And we'll see if we can get this to work, because there's actually 2 set points. There's a set point in the middle, and then there's another set point all the way out. And I think what kind of trips people up, first of all, is that there are 2 set points. The first set point, in my opinion, is trying to kind of get to a reset point, a mid-reset point that you can pick up and then fire the firearm, or you can let the trigger go all the way forward and then have a very uniform pull. And so let's see if we can try that again. Rack the slide. First round, you would cycle. You would come here, and then you could pull. Now here you go. You still have to pull the hammer all the way, or you have to pull the hammer back, I should say. I'm not going to say all the way, but you can see it's preloaded. The gun would fire. It would cycle. And if we can come all the way forward then on this pull, it's like the first pull. That's kind of the secret, I think, to this trigger. In my opinion, you have kind of two preference points. If you want to try to pick up the midpoint trigger and then fire, or let the trigger come all the way forward, almost like a revolver, I have to say, and then get that same pull. For me, I found it difficult not to find the midway point, but to really understand where that was in this whole mechanism, and then how much trigger I had to travel until I got another break. I found this very successful to shoot if I simply let the trigger come all the way forward. Interestingly enough, earlier I had mentioned this Coast Guard MSRT teams. I've seen numerous videos on them, and I've actually watched them fire this pistol, and that's how they do it. They allow the trigger to come all the way forward, and I've read some other trainers also suggesting that technique, all the way forward and then come back because it's already preloaded. I struggled working with that mid trigger. Every time I tried it, it shot low. So I was obviously not picking up where I needed to be in this trigger mechanism. But the first pull was great. There was no surprises. It didn't feel funny to me. And when I let that trigger all the way out and then pulled it, I was successful with this firearm. And I like it. I like it a lot. I found it very comfortable to shoot. It's one of the softest shooting 40s I think I've shot. There was a Sig 320, actually, a striker fired 40 that was also very soft, as I recall. I don't know if Sig's got a little secret here with 40 Smith & Wesson. I've shot some other firearms that were not very comfortable to shoot. And I guess that's not a bad segue. Once we've kind of talked about that DAK trigger, just some other comparisons. And one of the nice ones is an old Smith & Wesson 4006, right? This is a clear and safe firearm. Also would have been introduced in the 90s, so very relevant. Double action, single action. I shot this side by side. The quick assessment is, of course, the trigger is, the DA pull for these Smiths were long, not overly heavy, actually, kind of light, but long and extremely smooth. And of course, then you had a very fast reset, as we've talked about, for your single action on here. This firearm actually, it's funny, this is the heaviest of the three. The other one I'll show you is a HK USP compact. This one had the most of the, what I kind of consider the traditional 40 Smith & Wesson snap or bite, which I was surprised because it is, it's a little bit heavier. It's 37 ounces and an all-metal gun. So it was not bad, but of the three that I had that day, this was the most noticeable with that. And I probably have to attest maybe to maybe a simpler recoil spring or something like that. I don't think the spring is worn out on this gun by any stretch. So that's kind of how that looked or felt. And then the other firearm, again, another clear and safe firearm, is the HK USP compact in 40. This is the LEM trigger. This was interesting to shoot side by side. I think if you're looking, honestly, and you're trying to pick up a simpler trigger, I think the LEM trigger is a better trigger. It's more uniform. First of all, there aren't two set points. There's only one, and it's got a very nice reset. It's interesting, dry firing it, this gun felt like a very long and very gritty initial, double action trigger pull. On the range, that seems to kind of go away, or you're not as noticeable to it. Also, I wanted to comment that this gun with the polymer frame was very light on the recoil as well. Very, very similar actually to this all-metal 22 Sig, and we have to probably give credit to that recoil reducing spring system that HK uses. And to fire, this with the other two side by side, I have to say it absolutely worked. We have a lighter firearm with a polymer frame, and yet I'm getting kind of the same recoil impulse and feel from this 40 Smith & Wesson as I am on a much heavier gun. So kind of a real kudos to HK with that recoil reducing system and how well that felt. And again, the LEM trigger is a very nice trigger. Same concept of kind of, pre-staging the trigger, if you will. So that, just a nice job done there by HK. I kind of forgot how well they had designed this pistol and how well it shot. Anyways, but back to where we, kind of where we ended. So just for me, a very, very interesting firearm. It's neat to have. It is, side by side. That was the other thing I wanted to say. Taking three guns with three different triggers of different eras and designs is always kind of interesting at the range. I also had this gun out all by itself, and I shot it better just concentrating and working on it alone and utilizing in its own entity instead of trying to do comparisons and how this and that and all of this. So I think this is, again, one of those classic examples. If you're have this firearm or issued this firearm or enjoy it and want to use it, then just learn to use the DAK trigger in the way that you want to learn how to use it. And I think you'd be very, very happy with the firearm. And there's some great connection to some great law enforcement agencies that carried it. So anyways, I hope you guys liked that video. I hope it gave you some insight into kind of a unique pistol. I don't know how many DAKs made it into the civilian market. I know there was kind of a commemorative 1,000 pieces that were specially engraved that were sold into the civilian market, but I actually don't know. I assume maybe someone can help me understand that better, that SIG did introduce these to the public as well. I don't think it was just a government contract, but I don't know how many of these actually made it to the civilian market, or were the contract and the number of firearms that SIG had to produce, was that taking up all of the production. So, but again, great firearm. Hope you guys liked it. Thanks for tuning in again, and we'll see you all again very, very soon on the Daily Defender.